There is no time like the present, and we need to unplug from the matrix. I was listening to a friend this morning and he was leading this discussion about systems, just established systems that we have in our society. There are quote unquote the right and the wrong ways to do things. And we're not referring to anything being illegal and legal and so forth. We're not referring to laws, but just systems that are in place due to culture or society, certain expectations that may be established, but they do not have to be the norm. And he said, sometimes we become a slave to that system. We do certain things just because everyone does it. That's why I said it's time for us to unplug from the matrix, because if we all try to do everything the same exact way and we're all confined to the same guidelines, it's hard to express our creativity. It's hard for all of us to be successful because we're judging ourselves or basing our success on other people's metrics and systems. So we need to feel comfortable in embracing our own system and breaking out of the typical cycle or the average system so that you could truly be your best you. Because once again, you are your best when you're you. Now remember, I'm a teacher, not a speaker. When it comes to the water cycle, which is another type of system, the chemical property or the composition of water doesn't change. It's still H2O, but we could have liquid water and it could turn into gas through evaporation, or we could have solid water known as ice and it can melt and go from a solid to a liquid, which is known as melting, or we could take that same liquid water and put it in a freezer and it turns from a liquid to a solid, forming ice. And that's known as freezing. But did you know that we could break the system, step out of the system, step out of the cycle? And there are times when a solid could go directly into a gas. It doesn't melt into a liquid and then heat up and then boil or evaporate and turn into a gas. No, there are certain times when matter goes through a phase change and it goes from a solid directly into a gas. That process is known as sublimation. If you were to look at, let's say, a block of dry ice, because room temperature is so warm compared to the natural state of solid ice, dry ice, if you were to just watch it, it's gonna actually go from being a solid block directly into a gas. That's sublimation. But when that happens, guess what? That's kind of disrupting the system. That's not going by what the water cycle typically states, that it has to go from a solid to a liquid. So if that happens in nature, just imagine what happens with us as humans once we understand these things. And guess what? When sublimation occurs in nature or dealing with matter, it's natural. So we should not feel unnatural when we want to step outside of the system, when we want to break the cycle. And what we do is we're actually constructing our own system and our own cycle through the process. Now, I'm familiar with sublimation, but just while glancing at the term, sublimation occurs from the psychological standpoint. That's when you channel unwanted thoughts or desires and you turn it into something that's positive and constructive. A quick example could be maybe you're working on a group project or planning a group dinner and the other members in your group or your team are not holding their own. They're not holding their weight. They're not really contributing, and you start to have some pent up animosity or some pent up aggression or just a little slight bit of hostility. So what you do is you enroll in an MMA class, a mixed martial art class, and you're just going in on that wooden structure or with your sparring partner or the punching bag. You're taking that hostility and you're transferring it into something that's more positive. Now, of course, you do need to have those conversations, those uncomfortable conversations. But when you make that shift that may appear to be outside of the norm, outside of the system, that still is sublimation. You're channeling that unwanted thought or desires. Or maybe you're a person that just don't like being alone, because when you're alone, you start to feel, hey, nobody wants to be around me. You feel unloved, undesired. So what do? You try to get as active as possible. You enroll in a bunch of classes and courses and line dancing. You just enroll yourself, engage in so much that any time outside of what you have to do, your schedule's full. That's another example of sublimation. We had that change occurring, and it may be outside of what society may feel is the norm, is the cycle, is the system. We do not have to be a slave to the system. We should be free to be ourselves as an individual. And I just love the value that conversation brought. I just had to call out his government, but the conversation that Mason West shared with a group of guys as we had a great discussion. It's time to step out of the matrix. It's time to no longer become a slave to the system, but be free and independent to yourself. Now remember, I'm a teacher, not a speaker, and I want you to have an amazing day.